Hi, welcome to the Ywk Podcast. This is episode 14. My name's Olly and Becky's here too. And we're both youth workers who've been doing youth work for quite a long time. This week's podcast, we thought it would be good to talk about tackling some of the tough issues in life and how they can maybe relate from a Christian perspective and how we deal with that in discipleship place and an evangelistic place. And what is it like talking to young people about difficult things? What are the risks and is it worth taking them?
Yeah. So yeah, should we tackle tough subjects with youth, Ollie? Yes or no?
I think yes, although I say that slightly kind of warily, only because, I guess we've all had experiences of tackling the tough topics, and the sessions usually go quite well, but not always. And there's a lot to consider. And I imagine as soon as we say tackling the tough topics, it'll be broadly similar, but possibly a bit different in each context. There'll be one or two that come to mind that are like, yeah, there's this one. I think often it's maybe to do with like sexuality or sex, and possibly some of the more controversial parts of things that are in the Bible. Those would be mine. I don't know, what would yours be,
Yeah, I
Becky?
think though what you've mentioned, anything to do with relationships, porn, lifestyle stuff, sexting, I guess is a big thing, isn't it? Also, I think it can be really tricky to cover the mental health stuff if we haven't had a lot of experience ourselves either, or even think that it should be a thing to be covered, really, because unless you kind of look at your youth work as quite holistic, that might be something that never really comes up as a topic on its own.
I think one of the major things about why it's really important to cover some of these things with our youth work is because those are the things that young people are often thinking about. And actually, discipleship isn't just kind of knowing Bible stories and having the stock Christian answer to things. It's deeper than that. And if our churches and kind of organizations never look at the stuff that's going on in young people's actual lives, then it's easy to see how Christianity becomes irrelevant, because all it ever talks about is things that never really they encounter in their day-to-day life, or we encounter in our day-to-day lives. But things like mental health, statistically and anecdotally, mental health is a bigger and bigger issue for each generation that follows the next. And so, yeah, mental health issues in young people is a serious thing, and most young people will either struggle with their mental health or know someone who does, or be related to someone who does. I think it's just part of our everyday existence now. So yeah,
I think the only thing I'd add to that is that, like, discipleship obviously is hopefully all of our goal to disciple the young people that we've got in our groups and in our care, and that isn't just about Bible knowledge or Bible characters, but it's about growing well-rounded people who know how to apply the Bible to real life and can find God easily at work in their everyday lives. And actually, if we don't cover some of the topics that are happening in their everyday lives, then they don't necessarily know where to find God in those, or what God even thinks about some of that stuff, or how he would engage with it. And so actually it's our role to kind of help young people to navigate all of that stuff, not for God to be separate from it, or even, as Ollie said, be thought of as irrelevant in all of that stuff. But actually, God is bothered about the mundane and tricky parts of life. And actually, sometimes if we never cover the tough stuff, we risk young people thinking God isn't bothered about it when we know that he is. So actually, it's really important that sometimes we go out of our comfort zone to cover some of the topics. I think the other thing is, if we don't cover some of those topics from a Christian perspective, then who's going to? Like, we can't just expect parents to cover those things with their young people, because they might not even have the skills or knowledge or ability to approach it. school it definitely probably isn't going to cover it from a Christian perspective, um, which means they're probably going to get their info from their friends, which is statistically where they get most of their knowledge from, or the internet.
Yeah, or social media influencers.
Yeah. So, it's really important that we help them navigate that stuff. And I think we have a unique opportunity within that to actually work with parents to equip them as well to cover some of the topics. So if we know we're going to be covering them in youth group, we quite often, in my context, will contact parents and say, we're going to be covering this, do you guys feel equipped to do that? We've got a parents WhatsApp group where we kind of talk about stuff like that. And if parents say, actually, no, like, we'd love to know how you're going to cover it and what we might get asked off the back of it, then we kind of put on like a parents forum. We'll do like a Zoom call or something in the week and invite parents to it and go over what we're going to cover and try and equip them to help them, because it's all a partnership, isn't it? Like, we're all in it together. Actually, if young people are from Christian families, then parents are also going to be wanting to disciple their kids, and actually it's quite important, I think, to work together on, especially on the tough things.
Yeah. I think even as you're saying that, for me, it brings up one of the things, because I don't think anyone chooses not to cover these topics, like, oh yeah, no, I really don't want to talk about those with young people. Maybe it's scary, that puts us off. But and one of the, maybe never want to admit it, but one of the things that might put us off doing those is it's more effort. Like, if you just roll out the same old tried and tested stuff, then it's easy peasy. Everyone knows where the ground lies. People have easy conversations. There's no fallout. There's no mess. You don't have to interact with parents in the same way. It's the same depth. So it's less effort. Like, literally, it's more work. You're creating work for yourself. So I think it's important to see why you would want to do that, and have to stop ourselves burning out, to be like, no, this is why this is important, and this is why I want to do it, and this is why it's worth the extra effort, and being real about that, and thinking, okay, well, maybe what gets put down this week, if this week I've got to like engage more with parents and talk more about what we're covering, what do I not do to create the space to do that so I can do it well? Because I think you're right. I mean, I guess not all parents coming to our stuff will be Christian, but being open about how we're covering it. And we did this once with I came back sort of inspired, I think, from a Soul Survivor Leaders thing, and they were talking about, I think it was Youthscape, were talking about like covering stuff that young people are actually talking about. And I was like, yeah, we're going to do that. So we made a list of like stuff, and it was looking like pretty controversial. And in my mind, I was like, oh man, there's going to be some parents who are annoyed we're talking about this. So I thought, right, we'll preempt that, and we'll do like parents' evenings to talk with the parents, to show them what we're covering, how we're covering it, what it's going to be like. And it was great. And we asked for feedback and offered support where people needed support. But it's quite interesting to see. You could probably draw it down the line. I split it in three sessions per term that were like the controversial ones. And there was a real clear split of parents turning up to one parents' evening. I can't remember, it was where it was on like sexuality and relationships and mental health. They were like, oh yeah, no, we need to come to that. And everyone wanted to kind of be heard. And, it was a really good session. And I did another one, ran the thing, and it was about porn and something else. Or was it? No, it was porn. Anyway, they were less controversial and no parents turned up. So it's clearly, it makes a difference. And people want to know what you're covering with their children, and hopefully they want to be joined up in that with you. And
yeah, and I think it depends as well, like, on parents' experience of church. Like, some parents assume that it's the youth worker's job to cover some of this stuff, and they don't really need to cover it at home. And equally vice versa, like, some youth workers assume that it's the parents' job to cover these tricky things and that they're going to get covered at home, when actually, in reality, if we're not willing to take responsibility, then I think like it's going to get missed.
Yeah.
We have to take responsibility here and say, actually, we're willing to do our part, and we can work together to make sure we all feel more equipped to do it together. And it might be that, you know, nobody feels that equipped to cover these things, in which case, you know, it might be that you want to get somebody in to your youth group or in to speak to parents about it from outside, like somebody who has more experience of covering some of these topics and understanding what the Bible has to say about it. And that's okay as well. Like, I think it's not something you have to take on. I just think sometimes, like, we have, not sometimes, but, you know, we have to be willing to take responsibility for it. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to be the one that leads it.
Yeah, we're just the one who kind of makes sure that it happens and
Yeah.
gets talked about and is thrown in the arena.
Yeah. And I think, like, our role really is to help everyone navigate and let God lead and inform people. Like, we don't need to be the one that comes at it and says, I've got all the answers, you know. I've read the Bible cover to cover, and these are my interpretations. This is the truth, everybody, and this is what we all need to believe. Because even amongst parents, like, you're going to have difference of opinion. You're going to have some who think things are really black and white, and some who think there are a lot of grey areas. And even within the youth group, you know, you can't expect, even in a Christian context now, that, you know, 100% of young people are going to be straight. There are going to be some within there who are gay. And so, you know, it's about coming at these topics not from a judgmental point of view or from even a black and white point of view. Like, I think we have to come at all of them without judgment and actually with a whole load of love, understanding that actually some people get really hurt when these topics are covered in a bad, unthought out way. And so
it needs to be well managed.
Yeah, it needs to be well managed. It needs to be properly planned. You know, you can't just rock up one Sunday or one Friday night to cover these things without having done any planning. Like, we need to, you know, be praying about it in advance. We need to be looking at the topics and researching. We need to be making sure as a team we're kind of on the same page, even if we don't all have the same opinion, you know, that we're on the same page and this is what we're going to teach that our church believes, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think the other big thing is sometimes we think, oh, well, you know, I can't lead it now, but, you know, let me do research for however many weeks, months until I know more about it. And then when I have the answers, I'll cover it. But I think we have to be willing to dive in without having the answers. It needs to be, without judgment, with loads of love. And, you know, it's not necessarily about saying, because some things are quite clear cut, some things are less so. And I think actually how we cover it is really important. And sometimes when we come at it saying this is what everybody needs to do, if you don't subscribe to these rules and this lifestyle, then you're not welcome at this youth club. That's not how we want to come at it either, you know. But it's important that we talk about how, you know, that our own opinion matters. You know, as Christians and individuals, we've interpreted the Bible in a certain way, and how we got to that point counts. And it might be that actually we've been on a journey ourselves, and what we thought when we were 15 that the Bible said is not what we think the Bible says now.
Yeah.
So, you know, sharing some of that journey and how we got there is really important, but also understanding what it is that your church believes about some of these topics, so that you can say, well, as our church, we believe this. Because even amongst some of the topics, you know, there's difference of opinion amongst different churches of where they stand on it.
I think it's important when we're doing these kind of discussions or having a talk by somebody, but particularly with discussions, is to stress, and when we're managing and planning the group, to remember that this is real for real people. Sometimes a controversial opinion people really get like bedded down in, and it becomes entirely theoretical. And actually, pastorally, we need to remember that these are real people's lives we're talking about. And Becky, you mentioned that you can't assume just because somebody's in a church that they're in a church youth group, even and they have a straight relationship, you can't always assume that they're straight. You don't know where young people are coming from and where their families are coming from in these discussions, and so we're touching on live nerves sometimes. Like from my own experience, talking about porn, you got people from really Christian homes, and you think, oh, that's probably never going to be, it's not going to be an issue for this young person, and it is. And so you have to be sensitive to the fact that this is, people are going to feel sensitive about these things. So the lack of judgment and a sort of a clarity, I think, is really important to say, even if you have a very strong opinion, it needs to be held in love, and it needs to be, open to people being welcomed in, even even in where we, I would say porn's not a good thing, and I don't think it's good, but I don't want young people in our group feeling dirty or unwelcome or like they're some terrible sinner if it's something that they use and engage with, even they are, if they think it's wrong or not themselves, but to be able to create that space to be safe and share things that I think our culture is quite brittle. It's a little, I mean, people get a bit funny about cancel culture, but like, you say the wrong thing once and you're closed down or you're shouted down, and that's been the same in church for a long time as well. And I think that's really important to counter, because we all, and particularly young people, explore what we think sometimes by saying things that you instantly regret. Not even like a few years later, you say it and you think, nah, no, that's not right. But we need to let people have that space. But again, there probably needs to be some boundaries. If somebody says something outrageously racist, we wouldn't be like, oh yeah, well, I mean, sometimes people, think these things. Christians have different opinions. There is a way of managing it to be like, are you sure about that? And challenging things gently, even if we think a young person is wrong. But those challenges can't come from a place of like, right, and now you're out.
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, like sometimes, like it helps with our mindset coming into some of these topics to understand the context within which the young people themselves find themselves in. So you can find out all statistics and stuff online about how many young people watch porn, how many young people out of 10 would identify as LGBTQI, how many young people use things like sexting, how many young people suffer with a mental health problem, like all of those kind of things we might not have a lot of knowledge on or understand the context on properly. And so actually this is why I said the research bit is really important, because actually when we understand that stuff, we understand a lot better that there's going to be at least one person in the group who's going to find it difficult to cover the topic that you're covering, because they're going to be very, very close to it and potentially risk getting hurt from whatever you're going to say about it. So it's that understanding of the context of it is really important, because actually if we don't, and we assume that we're covering a topic because we're trying to be well-rounded and we think that it should be covered kind of thing, but that actually the young people in our group, they're not going to really struggle with this firsthand. We can't make those kind of assumptions, because actually that's part of the reason why we need to cover it, because young people don't necessarily, sometimes we assume they know a lot more than they do when actually they're ignorant on some of this stuff and they don't understand what's wrong or right or what's best for them. And so that's part of our job as youth leaders, to help them to navigate and make decisions in life.
Yeah.
And sometimes they've already made the wrong decisions, and actually it's about helping them understand that they've made a wrong decision without them feeling judged or guilty about it, but understanding the fact that, God always welcomes us back with open arms, and actually we all mess up sometimes. And, at the end of the day, God is love, and that's what he is the most. And actually, if that underlies everything that we teach and we do, then actually we're not building a youth group where we tell people what to do, or we try and get them to subscribe to, a whole load of things that we think is right. Because
Yeah.
actually it's a lot more powerful, isn't it, to help young people to realize the implications of their own decisions. And actually we should be cultivating not, a load of copies of young people who look exactly like us, who make the right choices all the time, but actually making sure we're actually cultivating space where young people can feel heard, have their questions answered, that we're fostering an environment where things can always be discussed, where they feel like they can come, when they have messed up, they feel like they can come and say to you, you were talking about that the other day, that's something I really struggle with. And they don't feel like they can't come to you with it because last week you said that thing was really wrong. Therefore, they can't bring it up because they're not going to be welcome anymore, or they feel like they're going to be judged, or
you're going to change your view of who they are. I think a really important concept is like this idea of kind of unconditional high regard for young people. I think and when you're covering controversial things, or where people maybe even think things that you find actually offensive, to have an unconditional high regard and think, do you know what, even if you hold that stance, I think you're good, and I think there's good in you. And then when young people come to you and say, I've done this thing and I'm not sure about it, that there's always redemption. And it's not about kind of wallowing in a kind of pity party or such a mess, but it's about saying, okay, if you want to make different decisions, there is another way. There's no pressure on that. There's no hate or judgment, or it's just like, if you want, there is another way. And kind of being unapologetic about that is a good thing. What one kind of final concern that I've had when trying to cover controversial topics, and I'm aware I've talked a lot more about porn than other controversial topics, mostly because I think, largely speaking, everyone listening will have the same view, that looking at porn is probably not a good thing for people. And other controversial topics, there'll be a range of opinions, hopefully, in the people listening. But I remember, again, looking at controversial topics, you want to manage exposure. Potentially, I never want to be the person who like says, hey, young people. I remember hearing of a terrible talk that was done, I think by a well-meaning bishop or someone quite experienced, and they went to a church and held up, like, I don't know, like a page 3 or like something slightly sketchy, and said, all your young people are looking at this. And I remember thinking, I wasn't there, but I remember thinking, well, they will be now, won't they? Because you just showed it to them, you mug. But like, we did a session on porn, and I was like, right, we're going to use normal language. We're not going to be all weird or hedge around it. And we're going to call a spade, and we're going to be very matter of fact about it. And one of my co-leaders, which I think is really important to have a team, and particularly if you can have a team that has a range of experience and opinions on things. One of my team kind of checked me and said, just be aware, these guys are year 7. They might not have, heard about porn. They might not know what it is. So we don't want to be like, hey, everyone's been on all these websites, haven't they? And, normalize it. And I was like, most people have seen stuff like that by the time they're 10, Anyway, we anonymously kind of got them to share, which I think is a good idea, their experience of porn, what they think it is. And it was so sweet. These guys were so innocent. And I'm really glad I didn't go all guns blazing into that exposure. However, a year later, lots of them would already, had their first experience of being exposed to porn. So the fact that we got in there first was a good thing. So again, it's about being well managed, and things like, if we're dealing with mental health, some things are socially contagious, so we need to be really careful about how we deal with them. So something like self-harm is socially contagious. So one person starts, it tends to spread. And again, we just want to be careful that we're not cavalier, but we do want to get in first. And if we don't understand, we can get help and experience from other people who are experts. There are excellent Christians who have a really rounded knowledge about mental health, and that's how I found out. I just asked a Christian who I knew, who's a psychiatrist, and he really helped me. And I think not being afraid to do that beforehand is good.
Yeah, and I think as well, like it's useful to have a plan, isn't it? So, you know, if other conversations happen off the back of some of these tough topics, you know, where young people do come to you and say, actually, this is something that I struggle with, or can you help me with this, or what should I do about this? You know, that we know we've got a rough plan of what we'll do in those scenarios. So, you know, like, is there somebody else, you know, within the church community that we can refer them on to for some mentoring, or is there a mental health specialist within the church who actually is happy to do counselling with people, or are there people on the pastoral care team who would, you know, help a family to cover some of this stuff together if there's stuff going on within a family that actually would be really useful to cover, you know, as a family. That's why the planning is really important, because you need to think through like what could happen as a result of this. And in those scenarios where, you know, it does go wrong and things don't come across the way that you meant them. Yeah, one of the worst fails I had, I think, was we did a whole series on like sex and relationships, and our line was definitely that we thought that we communicated that sex was for marriage. A few weeks, months later, like one of our young people accidentally fell pregnant, and they were like, well, that's not what I got. I thought it was okay to sleep with my boyfriend. And so it was like, no, that's not what we thought we taught. So like even in the midst of it, like sometimes we can have the best well-meaning in the world and things don't come across the way that we want them to. That's why prayer is really important. So like we had to go over what we'd covered and who'd said what, and whether actually we'd made any errors in the way we delivered the material. But yeah, sometimes, you know, with anything young people related, like you can share your opinion, you can share what the Bible thinks, and young people will always interpret or go their own way with stuff. And, you know, that just is how it is sometimes. Like we can't force people to believe certain things, or to do certain things, or to not do certain things.
No, we can only be consistent. And I think that's a big thing about being brave and consistent to what you think God is wanting you to communicate to the people he's given you kind of pastoral care over. And what people do with that and the way they behave, that's not up to us. And it can be funny sometimes too. I'm listening to you talk about the whole sex was for marriage thing. I did session after session with one particular group about like biblical perspectives on sex and like how it might be like a better thing to be married before you have sex, and gently done, but very kind of, you know, over a while. And then we went into one talk at Soul Survivor, and Andy Croft covered the exact same stuff we'd been teaching them for like 2 years. And they were like, oh, what a powerful talk. That's changed my life. I was like, what? How's that changed your life? We just said the same thing to you like a month ago. I'm just not as good or at talking or as good looking as Andy. That's what it is. But I think, you know, that work that we put in, it's never lost. Even when we think it's total waste or that it's a bit, you know, it's gone a bit wrong. I think done drenched in prayer with the correct intentions. And as Becky was talking about, cultivating that space so that young people feel heard and don't just feel like they're being preached at, but feel like they're in a safe place where they can think for themselves and pray and develop their own understanding. I mean, that's, for me, that's what it's about. That's great where we can do that. And yeah, they might come out with different opinions to us, and that might be because we're wrong. But if we've honestly kind of exposed them to what we believe God is teaching in a gentle, humble way, and that's done with grace. And I think that's basically all we can, that's the best we can hope for. Just make sure it's well managed and done thoughtfully, prayerfully, and with the support of others. And if you're in a position where you're like, Oh, I'd love to hear from a Christian psychiatrist about mental health, or I'd love it if there was someone who was an expert on dot dot dot. Either Google Christian organization sex or something like that, or if you want to get in touch with us, we'll definitely have connections. We can connect you with people we've talked to or things that we've done that might be helpful. There's no point reinventing the wheel if there are people around who've experience with that kind of stuff. Just reach out.
Yeah, I think there's one last little thing I'll add is I think this sort of environment that we cultivate is really important, because I think it rubs off on the young people and how they treat each other as well. So actually, if we foster an environment where, nothing is off limits, where they can share their opinion, where they know they're not going to be judged, where they know they're going to be, loved no matter what, then they are more willing to bring things up and to share their opinion. And sometimes you'll think, whoa, like, that's a crazy opinion, or that's interesting to know that they think that, because that's not, I don't know where that's come from, kind of thing. But sometimes, like, they'll share stuff and, like, a young person will be really honest, and actually their opinion will rub off on somebody else and it will be a really good opinion. And so it won't just be something that's been taught from the front, but actually you're also encouraging that peer-to-peer teaching thing, where actually they're sharing with each other as well. And that doesn't always go 100% according to plan either, because sometimes none of them come out with something that's really profound and deep, or good or biblical. But actually sometimes it really does, and sometimes you only get to that once you've cultivated those environments where they can share their opinion and they're not afraid for that to be different or to stand out.
That's one of the strengths of church, really, isn't it? That, I mean, there's lots of strengths of church, but one of them is that you rub shoulders with people who have different opinions to you and think differently to you and are different and have different life experience. And you don't get that in many places in culture. And I would argue, that is one of the key strengths in church. And if you're in a place where everyone thinks the same and there is no divergence and no difference of opinion, might be that you're in a cult rather than anything healthy. But I think a range of ages, life experience and opinion, that is something so valuable that our church offers to society, and that young people don't necessarily get. You see your parents, you see your peer group, and you generally hang out with groups of people who think mostly like you. To be able to be exposed to stuff that's different like that, like you're saying, and that peer influence, but that requires the confidence for people to say things that they're quietly thinking and know they won't be judged and that they'll be listened to, and that there's room to change.
Totally. And I think sometimes I've been really surprised by some of the things that has rubbed off from our church on our young people, that hasn't even, that or we as church haven't been that intentional on. Like, the goal hasn't been, let's teach the young people this. It's just been something that's happened by osmosis, just from them being a part of things, where, like, young people in our youth group have said, they've had conversations at school where they've stood up for people who, have been bullied because of their sexuality or because of different things, where they've had the chance to stand up and say, actually, not all Christians believe that, and you'd be welcome in our church, or or stand, doing the right thing, when obviously that's what we would hope and expect them to do. But actually, when you hear of them actually doing it, the little stories of the stuff they said, that they say they've said, and situations they've been in where they've been able to be real salt and light in the situation, and they've totally done the right thing, and you kind of feel proud that even unintentionally you've been involved in that, and that stuff has rubbed off on them in a good way. That's probably a good place to end.
Yeah, I think so. We'd love to hear from you if you have any stories of sharing controversial things, or things that you think the church has been silent on, and it would be good to cover, but you've either done it before or you've got no idea how to cover it. You just think the church has stayed silent on this for too long. It'd be good to kind of share that stuff together.
Yeah, and sometimes I just want to add as well that sometimes it can be really tricky if, for instance, like your church has a different stance on some of these topics than
Mhm.
you do. Actually, how do we then cover them,
With
within a youth
integrity.
environment with integrity? And sometimes, that needs to be part of a whole bigger thing where, like, actually we approach some of these topics as a church or as a PCC and kind of explore them together before to kind of reshape how the church thinks about it, or have the opportunity to do that before you talk to young people, or come up with our church believes this kind of stance.
Mm.
So, or sometimes it might not be clear at all what your church believes or thinks about it, and actually you have to start there before you can cover some of it with the youth group. But yeah, God's in all of it, and God always wants to lead us, to get to know him better and to be able to see him at work in our everyday lives. And actually, when we cover some of these tough topics, like, it makes God more evident in young people's everyday lives, and that in itself is worth it, I think, to cover, to have a few weeks or a few sessions of awkwardness is worth it in the long run, so that they
Mm.
can make more informed decisions, so that they can be more the people who God wanted them to be. So yeah, as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you've liked this episode. If there's anything you want us to cover more in depth, or unpack some of our fails and good news stories of how we've covered some of these tough topics, then let us know. We might do it if there's enough, if there's some people who want to hear it. But apart from that, yeah, we hope you've enjoyed the episode, and this is our goodbye, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.